This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by The Fire Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting thefirestore.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzow. I'm a fire officer up in the Wisconsin area. I'm also a writer here for Fire Rescue One. I am not alone. I write for one of the best editors ever. I like to call her the commander. She's also the lifeblood of the show, Janelle Fasquette. Janelle, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm great. I get to talk to a dear, I like to call him a friend. He's a mentor, a very, very just a giving, wonderful person that I think the fire service has really benefited from. And I like to call him kind of an unsung hero because you maybe haven't seen him out in the limelight as much, but he has been supporting us and creating some unbelievable programs on the side of mental health and counseling. So I'm very honored to have finally with us after you should have been on one of our first couple shows.
I thought so,
Captain.
as well.
I apologize for that, but we're going to make it one of the best now. We have Captain Frank Leto, who is with us. You served 38 years on the job as the Deputy Director of FDNY Counseling Service Unit. You helped build that unit basically right after 9/11, and we're going to get into that a little bit. Now you're actually still giving back to the fire service community with being a behavioral health coordinator with the IEFF for major events and disasters. You've worked now, taken that knowledge and skill to USAR teams and have been a behavioral health coordinator at some of major disasters like the Maui fire. You're now helping to prep with hurricane season, and we're going to get into all those different things. But first and foremost, thanks for being here. And how are you? I mean, you're retired now. You look great. What's going on in your life these days?
I'm doing just fine. It's a real honor to be speaking to both of you. Things are good. Retirement has been wonderful. It's a little busier than I expected, but that's all good. It's all good. It's about giving back now. It's been a great ride, and I want that to continue just for a little bit more.
Let's talk about the ride. Take me through really 9/11, right? And this is kind of where everything kind of started to come together for you from the standpoint of what your role was going to be with FDNY.
Yeah, so I mean, I had been associated. I had a degree in counseling coming into the job, so I had been associated with the counseling unit for many years before 9/11. So I would come offline to help with line of duty deaths. And unfortunately, that was, line of duty deaths in New York were 2 to 4 a year. From that year before 9/11, we had 6 line of duty deaths. So it wasn't something that was unusual at FDNY. So I would come offline and, help with that support. 6 months before 9/11, I was going to get promoted to captain. So I had come off the line to work at the counseling unit, because in New York, if you do something for them, then you might get a spot. I wanted to go back to Brooklyn. And so that was I was giving back. And then 9/11 happens and I'm at the counseling unit. So I did respond that day as a firefighter, as a lieutenant to the trade center, and worked there for the weeks after. But when I wanted to get back into the field, they told me, like, there's no way. This program, we had 343 of our firefighters that were killed. We had 600 children that had lost their dads. It just expanded out to parents and fiancés, and the trauma of the members that were on the job. The grief was incredible. The ongoing trauma that still occurred. Then 2 months and a day after 9/11, we had a plane crash in the Rockaways that just came right down in the middle of a neighborhood that was mostly first responders, police, fire, sanitation, teachers. nurses, and there were 250 people on the plane that were killed, and I think 6 or 7 in that neighborhood that were killed. So I just kind of realized that was where I belonged, even though I went there I was kicking and screaming. There were a lot of people in the field that were better firefighters than I was, or as good. I think, just God had a place for me, and I was there. And I did the best I could in the 20 years following that. And, things came up, and there was always something that was happening. And then in New York, having that role, when a major event happened, and the first major event outside of New York was Hurricane Katrina, I went as part of the IFF behavioral health support, and worked with that community. And then since that time, I had been called on to be the coordinator, behavioral health coordinator. There's a lot that goes on in these IFF responses. But the behavioral health part is an important focus of these events as well. And the impact can be felt many years later from first responders. And first responders, particularly after these events, I like to, I call it the hero to zero. They're at these events, they're doing everything they can. And then when the newspapers leave and the dust settles, you're left with your memories and your trauma. And many times, and most of the times, there's no one to talk to about that. So we're really trying to change the trajectory of those people's lives, and really prepare people beforehand. And I think that's where we are today, is really trying to prepare people for the eventuality of these events in their lives.
Yeah, it's the prepping people. I think you and I have had great conversations, obviously, through different conferences and just through the years. I think one of the things, and I think you had said this, to expect that a first responder would not be affected by all the traumas is like asking someone to walk through water without getting wet. Right. And you, I said that I put that in one of my seminars, and you go, I don't know if I said that. I go, but it sounds really good. So keep it, because I'm going to give you credit for it. But I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is we do the job. And then when all of a sudden, when all that settles, you want to make sure that people feel comfortable that they can go talk, and then that you have somewhere to go. Right.
It couldn't be more clear to me. After 9/11, we started getting funding to support our members. So one of my brilliant ideas was to put a clinician in each firehouse that had lost at least one firefighter. So we had 62 firehouses that had lost at least one. And what we decided is to hire a clinician, a therapist, a psychologist. And in New York, you can't walk down the street without tripping over one. So it wasn't hard to find psychologists, because we all need them in New York. And we embedded them in firehouses, and we told them, we interviewed them, we vetted them, we told them just go there and let the firefighters become comfortable with mental health. The program was basically a failure. And what we ended up having to do was to do support groups for the therapist. And right, at the time, I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. And now it's really clear. I mean, the level of grief and trauma that we were exposed to those days, and we are exposed to regularly, is not, you have to build a tolerance for that. There are very few people that can do what we do. And they were not prepared for that. So they were the ones that were struggling. We were actually trying to help them. At that point, we realized that the magic was us. The magic, why we put one foot in front of each other each day, is us. Like we're the ones that keep each other going.
Yeah. So from there, you're thinking, and what time frame was this after 9/11?
Yeah, so I think we started that program in January. We kept it going for 18 months, but in 6 months, we realized this is really not working. What worked ad hoc, after 9/11, we knew our firefighters needed support. So we called retirees in, and, kind of by accident, developed these really tremendous peer teams. And that was what was effective. So we started formalizing that peer program in like 2003. And then we had like a peer training in 2004. And ultimately that training that we developed in 2004 became the IFF's peer support training in 2016. So that was the basis of that. It's much better now. It has people contributed from all over the country, all different departments. But that was, I remember sitting in the room like in 2006 and 2007 with people from the IFF and saying, here, this program is something that we should be doing nationwide, because we were being called out to different departments around the country to share our peer training with, but we didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So, that was kind of the origins, and it kind of happened by accident. It certainly wasn't my brainchild. It was, kind of just happened, and we took advantage of it.
Yeah. Can I give you a little compliment here, and maybe give you maybe a dose of reality, and thank you, because I said you're kind of one of the unsung heroes, because everybody knows the people that were on the mound, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but you just are basically one of the first kind of persons in a position that discovered what really works for us as mental health. Do you understand how many people that's affected positively already and will? I mean,
yeah, I think we knew it. We just in New York had to get slapped in the face. And we did. I mean,
yeah.
There was no way you can get through what we went through without support. I mean, we were all in therapy within a year. Like you couldn't go on.
Yeah.
So,
right.
But before that, we just watch people, Sam. We watch people, deteriorate from work-related mental illness. Substance abuse, depression, PTSD, and we would watch them. We would watch them lose their family. We would watch them, have disagreements at work. We would watch them drinking themselves to death, eventually losing their jobs and losing their lives. And we enabled that behavior by taking care of them, because we were too tough to ask for help, right? And so when the walls came down here, we had to ask for help. We had to ask, we asked, when you're from New York, you don't need help from anybody else. We asked the whole country to help us. And thank God we did, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have been able to go forward. And we needed help with our mental health, because our families were struggling. The trauma went, through other families. My adult kids now, they talk about, the impact that the Trade Center had on them, and watching me, and then watching the struggles I had and the impact in their development. I had a retirement party, and my kids went up to talk, and they didn't expect. They were just kind of called up, and they talked about me being absent for many years, which was really painful. But I was glad that they felt comfortable having that conversation now, because we all become emotionally absent when we're overwhelmed with grief and trauma. Trying just to hold it together.
Yeah.
But you're also putting in the work to help other departments, because like to dovetail on what Aaron was saying, the impact of this, accidentally finding this peer support approach had such a a huge impact on other departments across the country. I had the privilege to speak with Assistant Chief Rob Sibley to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. And he said, someone from FDNY called me afterwards and said, I'm here for you, but when I'm going to call you again, I'm going to call you in 5 years because you're going to need me then. It's not going to go away. And creating this system of checking in on each other and the peer support element. And he just said, he expressed how much that meant to him. That someone from FDNY who had been through 9/11 knew what he was going to need because of what you went through, which is
Yeah, and
powerful.
I actually know the person that made that phone call to him, and it was a chief that worked with us. And we also know that some of these leadership positions are the loneliest places on earth because you don't have peers, and you don't want to show weakness. So there's really nowhere to turn. They don't have the kitchen table like we have it. They may be part of it, but are not on that same level. So it's been helpful, to have peer support on all different levels. And sometimes when it's a leadership position or an incident commander, sometimes that's not from your department, but it's helpful to have somebody that's had a similar experience. Sandy Hook was one of the worst.
Yeah. And we are talking about a lot of tragedies, but I think, this goes in with the theme. You need to find something positive sometimes. And, talk about some of the things you're feeling, and but B, find this positive thing. And you built this kind of peer support. And like you said, maybe it was an accident, but you still were able to recognize its value. So can you give me some more numbers about like when you started with FDNY and the counseling services unit, where were you at? And then like, how much did you expand that?
Yeah. So we were one location in Lower Manhattan. We had 12 people that worked in that unit. I think half were uniformed and half were civilian counselors. And we expanded to about 150 people in 6 locations, which still wasn't enough. Locations were all over the area. We had them in Eastern Long Island and upstate New York and Staten Island. Two in New York. We had a substance abuse program that we expanded out, and we had probably about 70 in-house employees, and then peer support, about 100 peer support, regular peer support people that we were working with. So it had grown exponentially, and we were really just barely kind of scratching the surface still, because the FDNY, when you think about the number of employees, is 16,000 employees. And then when you think about their families, now we're talking about maybe over 100,000 people that were absolutely grief-stricken and traumatized, 100,000 of us. We peaked as far as counseling. I think it was about 18 months. So 18 months after is when we saw the highest number of people, and it kind of leveled off and then dropped off from there. But it's not unusual that people had come in 10 years after the trade center with full-blown PTSD, and was their first time they walked in the door. Mm-hmm. We're like, where were you? Where they were was absolutely watching their lives fall apart and not recognizing it, and losing, 2 wives or 2 husbands later, their kids no longer talking to them, a DWI later. And that's the tragedy, that as, all first responders, that we're not thinking about this before the event and preparing ourselves before the event. And when the event happens, and the event could be, doesn't have to be 2 buildings falling down, the trade centers. It could be a pediatric death in your community. Are we building resilience and education beforehand? And when these events happen, are we recognizing it right away, and are we intervening? We're missing that still.
Yeah.
I'll get in front of firefighters, at a conference, and I said, how many of you were told when you walked in the door, and some of my young people there, that your PTSD levels will be probably twice with the general population, and your depression levels will be higher, and your substance abuse levels will be higher, maybe even double with the general population. Did they tell you about that when you walked in the door? That kind of should have mentioned that, right? And it kind of should have mentioned what that looks like and some tools to correct it. But we're still not doing it. We're still not doing it. So, that's, for me, that's the motivation here. Like, I've watched this thing change and turn for the positive, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. But we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Do you think at FDNY, has that culture changed with it?
Yeah, it has. It has. You go into a kitchen at a firehouse in FDNY, now they're arguing who has the best therapist.
I don't mean to laugh, but that's a great conversation,
no,
right?
It's a great conversation. Is it Prozac or Zoloft? What's better?
Yeah.
And that's great. That's great.
That's progress. But I like the fact that you said we still need to intervene and educate. So we can recognize this. I think you also said to build resilience before that. So let's take that kind of approach for it. If there's somebody that's listening that that has a peer support, or a lot of us on the job are really focused on building resilience. Give us a couple of things that where you go in and you start. Where do you begin with departments or even individuals?
Yeah, I mean, so there's individual resilience and there's department resilience. There's educating supervisors. I mean, there's nothing that leads to job satisfaction or job dissatisfaction more than a direct supervisor. So you can work for a lousy department and have a great lieutenant or captain, and you're going to be happy. And you can work for a great department and have a miserable first line supervisor and be the most miserable person in the world. So how do we, first is, we start with those first line supervisors and educate them about behavioral health, and starting there. And then individual resilience and exercise and sleep management, diet, all the things that, like, we were making meals, and when I first came on, it was a pound of butter in each meal. We would go, like, they would get 5 pounds of butter for 12 guys. I'm like, what are we going to do with this? We should have had like a dairy farm in our kitchen.
Well, you had the big platters too, right? Chief Selka tells a story where they're, you're serving with those 14-inch platters and guys are just piling them up, right?
Like, I couldn't believe that was a meal for one person, but I got used to it. I'll tell you that. And, the donuts and the bagels and, all that's changed though. I mean, now fruit was introduced and exercise was introduced.
Salads,
so, yes.
EMS, eat a salad with every meal, or
eat more salad.
Eat more salads. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. But so many of us are still treading water, and emotionally, financially, physically, and when you're treading water, and you hit a bump in the road, you're going to drown. And that's really the key, right? So if, we had a great peer in New York, and his name was Ralph, and Sam, I'd love for both of you guys to meet this guy. He's a big Italian guy. And he was just the perfect peer. Anybody that met him, he was able to break down in minutes, and they became his best friend, and they loved him. And he always had sayings, but he said, show me how somebody looks on September 10th, and I'll tell you exactly how they're going to look on September 12th. And like, he knew this stuff intuitively. He knew it intuitively. And, if we're not prepared for our job, we're going to have, our career is not going to be healthy, and our retirement is going to be even worse. One of the statistics I have seen in New York. So they study us, people that responded to the trade center. Every 5 years, there's all kinds of data and information that comes out about our physical health and our mental health. And what they recognized, looking at people that were active, at 15-year mark, they looked at active members, and I was one of those, and retired members that responded to the trade center. And the clinical depression of active members, about 9%, which is high, but 9% was what we were, 1 in 110. And then the clinical depression of retirees, same age group for the most part, now they're just retired, was 24%. A quarter of our retirees were clinically depressed. And that just shook me. Here they're golfing, playing with their grandchildren, no longer responding, waking up in the middle of the night, supposedly getting good sleep. And you know what? They weren't. And so that kind of led us to think about why, and we kind of knew some of the whys, but we have so many protective factors when we're working. Just doing good is really healing. Like being, doing good, going to a car accident, pulling somebody out, getting somebody to the hospital, and then like that stuff is healing. And then we have each other. You and I respond to the same call. I see you 10 years later, we walk into each other. 5 minutes later, we're talking about that call. We need to do that.
After we razz each other first, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that kitchen table, that if you can bottle what's there, you'd be a billionaire.
Yeah.
Because that's the healing part. When you remove some of those protective factors, that's what you get. You're getting a 25%, 24% clinical depression rate. That's not okay. So that's not okay. So we can't leave this profession and then not be well for all that we've done and all we've done for our communities. So that's just another avenue that we need to look at.
Are you seeing the shift away from the kitchen table contribute to these issues, like with more people being just like on their phones and disconnected? And
yeah, I think so. And people have their own bunk rooms, but this is, we have to change with the times, right? So, people are more isolated in general, Janelle. I mean, more isolated because they have this phone, it's part of them. And you have a conversation with somebody and they're looking at their watch, so that I would agree that it's an issue, but we're not going to go back in time. So how can we overcome it is what we need to look at.
It seems like, like you said, we have to evolve and move forward. However, it seems like it puts the onus on the supervisors to really be intentional about forming those bonds and finding opportunities for the crews to find that camaraderie, even if it's in a different way than maybe the kitchen table of the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of what I've seen in my career in mental health and others comes out of creativity. And doesn't come out of headquarters. It comes from someone that has a good idea, that is compassionate, that makes things work. So I my advice is just be as creative and compassionate as you possibly can be. And know, if you're a supervisor, know that these people, you've been there before. Know they're younger, they're starting out their lives, they're having kids, they're having, they're trying to, use smoke and mirrors to pay their mortgage, every day. And, when they come to work for you, it should be an honor, to serve with people, even if they've got 2 months on the job. I think, changing that mindset is helpful as well.
One of the things I tried to take, and I actually had, I mentioned Chief Salka, and I'm not going to say his complete name. We'll say the other Frank. Had some great conversations as as I've become a new officer. I've had a lot of people from the podcast give me some great advice, and And I try to lead by this. Is just when we're at the dinner table, I'm trying to put my phone down.
Mhm.
And I think, one thing someone said to me, and I don't know if it was my dad, as a matter of fact, said, just show interest in people, ask a question. Like, do you know where your crew went to high school? You know what their mascot is? Do you know if they know the movie Wayne's World? It We watched a stupid movie yesterday, something about Mary, and one of my youngest members of my crew is 23 years old, had never seen the movie, and he was laughing so hard that it was contagious. And 15 minutes, I'm looking at everybody watch this movie, and I'm like, you know what? This is awesome. This is what I hope we can continue, to do. And so maybe if somebody's listening, I think based on what you're saying too, you know, uh, the real Frank, as we'll call him, that connection, and that's what maybe these retirees are missing is that connection. And you said if we could bottle that up, man, we would have an unbelievably uh, well, we have a lot of money, but just I think a really great product from the standpoint of helping to build resilience,
Yeah.
that camaraderie, and piggybacking on that. So you mentioned fitness, nutrition, you mentioned, creating relationships. I mean, what else have you seen, and would you recommend for any of our listeners to really help them start to and keep their resilience?
I feel like a fraud talking about this because I didn't sleep for 38 years. And only since I retired realized the importance of sleep. I mean, I wore it like a badge of courage that I was sleeping 3-4 hours a night. Meanwhile, I was killing myself. I literally, and I'm being totally honest. When I retired, I thought I was dying. I thought this is what it feels like to die. Because I was physically in pain, I was mentally exhausted, and it was time for me. And when I retired, I realized the importance of sleep. And like, if you can throw everything out the window, you need to sleep. And it's hard with shift work. It's really hard. It's hard with shift work and balancing childcare. My wife is a nurse, and I fell into the stereotype, the firefighter and the nurse. And we balanced childcare, we balanced our careers, we balanced community issues, the church, all that stuff, and we were killing ourselves in the process. So yeah, if you had to start somewhere, is figure out really good sleep hygiene. And then the importance of relationships. And most of us, and when I talk about this with firefighters and first responders, most of us don't have anyone to talk to, because we're the person people are talking to. We're the person that people come to. I've seen it like with line of duty deaths in New York. The firefighter was always holding up the family, and when you pull that out, when you pull that person out, he was the rescuer. He or she had, developed relationships. Their spouse, they were rescuing. They were the rescuer, even in their personal lives. And when you move them from the equation, there was a house of cards that fell, because we don't have anyone to go to. I would ask anyone out there, if they had a personal issue, do they have someone that they trust that they can talk to? And more times than not, with a first responder, the answer is no. So, find that person, develop that relationship, open your heart, trust someone with yourself. And if you can do that, I think that goes a long way to building personal resilience.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision we make as a company is about you, our customer. We wouldn't be where we are today without you, and we don't take that lightly. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at thefirestore.com for everything but the truck, and shop our family of brands, including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, I just wanted to circle back on the sleep thing for a second and note how amazing it has been. And I've said this before on previous podcasts, how kind of surprised, shocked I've been that the number of guests that we have had on the show whose number one piece of advice is related to sleep. We had Dr. Glenn Landry on the show. He's a sleep expert who works with first responders, specializes in shift work. And he said, it is not too late. You can still change the process. You can shock the system back into healthy sleep. But man, it's amazing. Tim Sendelbach, Dina Ali, countless people on the show have talked about the power of sleep. And you mentioned the badge of honor. Dina told this story about this new member on the crew and how he was like, you know what, I'm going to go take a nap. And it was like this eye-opening moment for her because no one would have ever admitted that they were going to go take a nap before. They would have said something else, made something up maybe because that was this, a sign of weakness.
Yeah, yes. Sleeping and showing emotion, two of the healthiest things that you can do were really frowned upon and still on some level. In my era, I don't know if you guys heard it when you were growing up, but I'll give you something to cry about. Did you ever hear that?
I'm getting PTSD. Just Dad, I'm sorry, Dad. He did it, Dad. Oh, wait, sorry. Wait, what were you doing here?
So what did that teach us really was, okay, we're not going to show emotion, particularly males. We're not going to show emotion. So it has to come out some way. So it came out in anger and then we'd go have a fist fight down the block or whatever, something unhealthy. And so that's the way we were raised, so you have to, break that trend, and show emotion, I think it was 2018, 2019. I'm sorry if I forget the date now. We had a line of duty death of a female EMS officer. She, in the Bronx, somebody went into her ambulance and was driving it away, and she tried to stop the guy, and she got ran over and was killed. And I had never been to a line of duty traumatic death of a female before. And EMS, half the EMS are women, half are men. And on the fire side, it's the numbers are terribly low on women. And we're doing better, but still not good. But anyway, so responding to the hospital and where people congregate, there were hundreds of EMS men and women. And for the first time in the hundreds of line of duty deaths I've experienced, I saw healthy expressions of emotion because women were leading it. They were hugging, they were crying, which led the men to be able to do the same. And it was a terrible day, but it was wonderful how they were healing each other. Now, with men, if it's all men, they're sneaking back and forth to their trunk and drinking because they find therapy in the bottom of a bottle somewhere. And they can't show emotion, and they're not hugging and crying for the most part. They're trying to be as stoic as possible, which has to come out somewhere at some point. So, I learned a lot that day. We need to learn from our female counterparts they just do it better than us. And, hopefully as the fire service becomes more integrated, we start learning from each other on how to deal with these events.
Are there other events that stick out in your mind, kind of like that one, that were either learning, moments for you, or just things that, you had difficulty dealing with? I mean, you're the one counseling everyone else and setting this all up. I mean, what kind of difficulties did you have?
Anytime any one of these events happens, if I have to travel for it, and when I come back home, there's a period of time of recovery. At first, I didn't know what that was. I thought, what's happening to me? But then I recognized that I needed to recover. I needed to talk with people that were at that event, because when you're in it, you're working, and so you're trying your best to hold off the emotion, which is important because you need to work. I mean, I mentioned Sandy Hook as being, it took me 6 months to recover from that. Many of the mass shootings, I just, it takes me months to recover, and I have my own therapist, which I have on speed dial when these events happen, and she is, she's wonderful. I think we need to have that. We don't need to be, when I say I'm in therapy, I'm proud of that. I don't go weekly. I did for a long time, but now I go in for a tune-up,
Mm-hmm.
and that's my person to talk to. So yeah, every one of the calls, every one of the major events that I've been to has taken a piece. I think, and there's a silver lining. I grow and learn. I think we all do from these events. I meet unbelievable people. I've been to unbelievable communities with resilience and strength. So I always think of an honor to be there, an absolute honor. The day of the Trade Center, I was probably as scared as I've ever been in my life. I was shaking to my bones. I'd never shook for that long and continued to work, but knew to my core that every firefighter in the world wanted to be exactly where I was. And I felt honored to be there. And I knew that I was privileged to be there. So I always feel very honored to be there, wherever there is. And I always know that I'm a guest in that community, and try to not tell them what they need, but ask them what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And look for voids that are not being filled, and give suggestions. But know that that I'm there just for a moment, and it's their job to carry on.
And you're talking about now you've transferred from helping just FDNY. Now you're going out, like we mentioned Sandy Hook, we mentioned Katrina, and you're helping as part of a task force to go down and set up behavioral health teams down there. Is that correct?
So with the IFF, it's all encompassing. We're getting prepared for this hurricane season,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot to this, but when a storm is coming ashore in Texas or New Orleans or Florida, there's a cone, that cone of uncertainty, where we know where every firefighter lives in that cone. Like they're plugs, they're dots, and we know exactly where, when the storm comes through, whose homes were affected, and we reach out to those first responders. Do they need their house ripped out, from the sheetrock ripped out? Do they need their mom taken to dialysis? What do they need? Because we know they have to continue working. So what can we do? So it doesn't look like a mental health intervention, and the best mental health interventions don't look like mental health interventions. It's what do they need to do to keep working? What do we need to do to support a family?
But then you're also there a years after then to come back and say, hey, when they're finally, like you said too earlier on in the program, you're like, we're gonna do all that work, but then there's gonna be that time where we need to understand how it affected us too. So then that's where the teams come in, and the peer support,
yes.
right?
Well, I mean, maybe a little bit off topic, but I was recently had a conversation with a retired colonel from the Army, West Point grad, and I supported the USAR teams in Haiti after the earthquake in Haiti, and I think the USAR teams were there for 10 days or 12 days. This Army colonel was in charge of delayering the hotel that the 13 Americans were killed at. So he was he was in charge of delayering that and using local resources and resources from outside country to delayer this hotel. I think it's over 10 years ago. He is struggling still with that, what he did there. This is a highly educated guy who knows about mental health. And, the impact is a decade later is still as strong. So it's just starting when the dust is settling at a crisis. It's just starting for you because we put our game face on, right? Like, we're going to work here. We have a job to do, and we're going to do it. By hook or by crook, we're going to do it. But it takes its toll. And it's the responsibility of the organization to recognize that and intervene.
Yeah. And to set resources in place ahead of that. So how are you now? You're doing these great things with other organizations. I mean, which other ones? I know we've done some work together at FRCE. That's how we met. So you're doing FRCE, Responder Strong. Go ahead. Yeah. What other organizations?
Started by this a firefighter paramedic in Aurora, Colorado. And I met her in Aurora, Colorado after the theater shooting there some years ago. And her name is Rhonda Kelly. And she started this organization, Responder Strong, which has grown dramatically over the years. And she's moving away from Responder Strong. Sarah Jenke's group, NDRI, is taking it over. And so Sarah asked me to, help support Responder Strong. And I was thinking, okay, so what is a responder? And, when recently in Maui, the responders, of course, are the USAR teams, the firefighters, the police officers. But who is responding as well? The heavy machinery operators who live in that community that are lifting buildings off of burnt bodies. And nobody's thinking about them. The emergency room nurses, the doctors, the people that are stringing the lines, the electrical lines through this utter destruction, that, this was their home. And we're not thinking about them. And we're supporting our men and women. That's great. We should be even doing more. But we should expand what we think as responders. Teachers, doing drills, for active shooting drills with first graders, even if they're not in an active shooting event. I mean, to me, that's traumatizing, lining, 6-year-olds up, in case of a shooting. Are we thinking about them? So with Responder Strong, we're thinking about, people, the oil spill, the EPA, the EPA, East Palestine was the train derailment there. The EPA is still on the ground, mitigating this, the chemical spill and telling people that it's safe to go back into their homes or it's not safe, and getting the wrath of that community. Because when people have been devastated like that, they're angry and they need somebody to yell at. So they're there trying to help, and they're getting screamed at. And the same thing, they're still in Maui, and they're there for months away from their family. I mean, I go in, I'm there 2-3 weeks tops. I leave these people to, rebuild the community. And I don't think I think they're the unsung heroes, if there are any.
Captain, we were talking offline earlier about this a little bit, and you mentioned moral injury. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what that means to you in this context, because I think this is a new term for a lot of people, and kind of how that connects to the pain or the PTSD that they feel after some of these incidents.
Yeah, I think for someone out there that does not know what moral injury is, I think I heard a perfect example with me, because it kind of shook me. And it was, in a community that had some kind of chemical oils spill next to an elementary school. The governing body said it was good enough to go back to school for these kids and these family. And the EPA person did not believe it was and knew that she would not send her kid there, but had to, as part of her role, tell these families it was good enough to go back. So she's watching these little kids pile into this school, knowing that in her heart, it wasn't the right thing to do. So to me, that would be a perfect example of a moral injury. Knowing in your heart it's wrong.
Mhm.
There's a lot of other examples. Seeing people, not giving, correct patient care, and turning away because you don't want to rock the boat. It stays with you because you're making these decisions. You're making the decision to go against what you feel is right. So you battle yourself.
Yeah. Similar to trauma in some
Yeah.
cases,
Oh,
right? Similar to PTSD and
I
Or
think
it
it's
creates that trauma.
yeah.
that-
I think it's
Right.
exactly the same. And I think the symptoms are the same.
yeah.
You're not sleeping, you're not eating right, you're arguing, and you're isolating because it's hard to live with yourself when
Yeah.
you've made those choices.
And that transfers to, we talked about family and relationships and health, drinking more, or reaching for drugs and alcohol. And it's this kind of vicious circle and cycle. And, peer support's a great way to really help with that, building resilience. And you talked about sleep, you talked about building relationships, you talked about, fitness, hobby, I think, is something too we kind of talked about, other than outside, having something outside of the fire department. And so let's turn a little bit more, like, now that you're retired, you've created these unbelievable programs, that have now transferred to the rest of the fire service, have transferred now outside of the fire service. You've really been one of the pioneers of the peer support kind of model, and you're working with other agencies and organizations. Are you having any hobbies? Are you enjoying yourself? I mean, what about you personally? Are you taking care of yourself? Because I don't think Frank Leto has more to give here, and I want to make sure we get it out of you. So give me some news about yourself.
Yeah, so I exercise every day, probably more than I should at my age. I still run between 3 and 5 miles every other day. I'm at the gym the days that I'm not doing that. I'm really trying to get some sleep, the right amount of sleep. I'm not taking red eyes or doing anything like that anymore. Spending more time with my family. We just got back from Portugal, which was wonderful, with all my adult kids and my daughter's husband. So really trying to take advantage of the things that I missed during my career. And if I have any regrets, it's that. And my other regret is pushing people really hard. And I recognize that, long before I retired, that I pushed people really hard because there was too much work to do. And that's not okay. It's not okay. Not everybody's going to be you. And you have to, use people, in their comfort zone. So that's, if another advice is really don't overextend the people that work for you, and particularly the people that are good that work for you, because that's who you go to all the time. I talk about the great peer Ralph, and he said he had to get away from me. This was probably 2008 or something. He says, Frank, I like, because every day there's 5 things that happen in New York, right? So, and tragic things. And so I was killing them. So he said to me, I need to go on a motorcycle trip across the country, and you're going to give me the time to do it. And I said, yeah, you come back when you come back. So I had him pegged on the board. I had a map of the US, and he would call me and I pegged him around. And then he was down south someplace when the Charleston fire happened. So 9 firefighters died in Charleston, and I was the behavioral health coordinator for that. So I had been back and forth, and we had FDNY members down there for probably 6 months, and at least 4 guys at a time. And I needed Ralph because things were going south, and I knew Ralph would pull this all together because he just was magic. So I said, Ralph, he's on his motorcycle trip. And I said, you got to do me a favor. He goes, oh, Frank, I didn't want to get this call. I heard about the fire. I said, you got to do me a favor. I said, I'll get you a suite in Charleston. Not that convinced him. He said, but I'll get you a suite in Charleston. So he's having dinner with, the peer support that we had down there. And he said, Frank was so nice. He got me a suite. They said, Ralph, we're in a freaking embassy suites. They're all suites.
Oh, cat's out of the bag now.
But, I know it's a long story, but really, when you have these events, you think, okay, we got to, there's no sleep is an option. We've got to work to the bone. And that's the wrong approach. And I learned it the hard way. The approach is to get the proper sleep, have enough people. If somebody's emotionally exhausted, have them feel comfortable to tell you that, and open to that. And it doesn't mean that they can't come back ever. Give them the break and invite them back when they're ready. All things that I would do and are doing differently now than I did in the past.
We talk about protocols in the fire service a lot, and I like to simplify things. I always tell Janelle I got like 4 brain cells left. I'm, 50 years old, so I have to simplify stuff. But you really talk about creating your resilient protocol, and the protocol is the sleep, is the relationships. And what unfortunately happens with us, sometimes we get in survival mode and we go away from that protocol just to survive. And would you say the best thing we need to do is stick to that protocol when we get in those positions where we really are stressed?
Yeah. So another amazing thing that happened, and I kind of knew it, but I didn't until I saw the data. There's a study out of Israel, and this was before the current conflict. And it looked at Israeli firefighters. There's 400 Israeli firefighters who studied this at the University of Tel Aviv. And they saw the firefighters that were traumatized and immediately processed. And they looked at firefighters that were traumatized and distracted themselves. And they found that the firefighters that distracted themselves were the healthier ones, which was amazing to me. So if you are traumatized, you distract yourself, then process, then you're going to be the healthiest. If you try to distract and don't process, you're not going to be healthy. And if you try to process too quickly, you're not going to be healthy. So the perfect example is exercise, nutrition, go fishing, hunting, whatever it is that you do to bring your systems down, to get your heart rate where it should be, your blood pressure, whatever it is, to calm your mind. And now let's process, right? So if we try to process too quickly, we're going to be overwhelmed with that event. And that was the difficulty I saw in a lot of the debriefings that I was a part of early in my career, that we were kind of forcing people to process when they weren't ready. Everybody has a timeline, and we have to understand that as organizations, right? So it's about continuing to take care of yourself, even taking care of yourself more after these events. And if you're not in the habit of doing that, then you're not going to do it after the events. So, part of exercise is getting used to being uncomfortable. Right. And,
consistently. Yep.
Yeah. So, you push yourself to uncomfortable. So we're comfortable with being uncomfortable, and, continuing to do that during and after an event. You're not going to go for, a 5-mile jog the day after the terrible event that happened in your community. That's probably not going to happen, but, working yourself back. Knowing that if you're going to, these things are marathons, and if you're going to run the marathon, you have to be taking care of yourself, or else it's just going to fall apart. And you may look like you're not falling apart, but everything around you will. Your family will, your finances will, everything will.
Yeah.
And then
Eventually it catches up.
Eventually it'll catch up.
Eventually it catches up. And I think that's lasting advice. And I think the application of this is the tough part, but don't give up on it. Try to stay consistent with it and build your protocol, I think is kind of the next step if you don't have one. And if you do have one, make sure you stick to it and build upon it with some of the things that Captain Leto has given us. And Cap, I can't tell you enough. Thank you. This is awesome. And I did say this now, probably the third time, you are an unsung hero because you've been supporting so many people that support communities, and you've been supporting and building these programs that help keep us responder strong, help keep us, mentally fit. And also now, you really preach about the physical side of things. And so thank you for that. And thank you for all your service. And I keep looking forward to the next project you work on, because everything you've been doing is continually growing. When's the book? Are you going to do a book?
I've been asked that. I can't string two sentences together, so it would be a real challenge for me. But maybe you can help me, Sam.
I got a good editor. I know a good editor. She makes me sound smart on paper, so I got a good editor. And speaking of our editor, now you can't go yet. We still have some we like to call them hot seat questions. Hang on, Janelle's got.
I'm nervous. I don't. Maybe
These are the hard hitters. These are the heavy hitters now.
All right, Cap. We've talked about various issues today, but I want to know, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the fire service today?
So in my field or in general, I think if you talk about the fire service, I would say it's the urban interface. Where we're watching wildfires encroach on communities, and we encroach on wildland. I think that's that's the biggest that faces the fire service. If I had to say one thing, as far as in my area, when I came on, and I go to a funeral every couple of weeks now. Just was one last week of friends that are dying of health-related diseases. And I know it's probably amplified here in New York, but I know that's all around the country. And I used to think, and I think we all thought, that was because of our exposure. And I think that's certainly part of it. But now I know that's not the only reason. I know it's our behaviors that are leading to our high cancer rates and our high cardiac rates. I know it's our sleep. I know it's our PTSD. I know it's our depression. I know it's our substance use. I know it's our diets. And, when I got a call in the middle of the night as a fire officer, came back and had a donut. Like, I don't know why I did that, but we were doing things like that because we needed to. We needed to get the sugar up or whatever. So it's unhealthy lifestyle that is killing us as much as the exposure. We're protecting ourselves. We're wiping things down. We are using our protection, but we're still lagging when it comes to our behaviors. So when someone like Zam out there, saying, and now people listening, you have to have this job. You have to have fitness beyond the general population. You have to address mental health issues. You have to address substance use, because we have the double whammy. We have that and the exposure, and the startling calls in the middle of the night that you can't stop, and the trauma that that's going to happen, and the trauma comes from within us. How we are experiencing these events. So that's that's where I would focus. As heavily as we're focused on protecting ourselves with our protective gear, how are we protecting ourselves with resilience?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenges, what's the biggest challenge you've really overcome recently, personally?
In my career, is PTSD. It was being diagnosed with PTSD, and probably dealing with it years after I should have. Diving into my work the way I'm not a big drinker, or but what I did was became a workaholic. And just work. I was on a ride with my wife, and we would talk. We drove past her hospital where she used to work. She's retired a couple of years. And I said, I probably worked 60 hours a week when I was working. And that came up in the conversation. She said, Frank, you worked 90 hours a week. All you did was work. And when you weren't working, you were working. You were sneaking phone calls. You were, going into the basement and getting on the computer. Like that's how I dealt with it. It's unhealthy. It was unhealthy, just as drinking's unhealthy.
Yeah.
So I think knowing it, seeing in other people, and understanding the data and the research, and still not seeing it in myself. So I think that's the biggest thing I've overcome, and being able to say to others, like, I've recovered and continue to recover from that, and you can as well. Mm-hmm. And I on that is, giving people information, as much information as you can, is healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's multifaceted approaches here, and one of the key things I think to deal with all of this is having a support system. And for you, who has been the biggest positive influence in your life and career?
Yeah, I mean, so professionally, I can. There's a huge list. In New York, there's been so many. My colleagues, they held me up, and anything that we did in New York, it was somebody else's idea. I just stole it. It was one of the people that worked with me, and we were a great team. Pat Morrison from the IFF has been a great inspiration. Willie Osterguy from Boston Fire is like the grandfather of mental health in the fire service. There have been so many. Ron Sarnicki came to New York after 9/11, and I was forced to meet with him in a hotel on Sunday afternoon. I went there in my bunker gear. And he said he was going to do all these wonderful things for me. And I said, I left there. I'm like, first of all those people talk funny. And I'll never see them again. And, they're still in New York supporting our programs. And, Ron Sarnicki has been an unbelievable supporter personally and professionally. So I can't say enough about the people that were around me, the people that, told me when I was wrong, and helped me when I was struggling. So it was really amazing how people come together in tragedy. And my family, my wife Chris, being a nurse herself, she understood intuitively what I needed to do, and she never ever got in the way, even though I got in the way of so much in our family because of work. She's, I think, proud of me. She's been an unbelievable supporter. July 1st, we were married 35 years. So, that was, I'm glad. It was not always easy. 35 years was not always easy. And, she stuck with me, and I stuck with her. My 3 kids, who are now adults, that I can have those conversations with. And, I'm really not good at small talk, and they all know that. If you want to know the weather, go watch the Weather Channel. If you're going to sit and talk with me, it's going to be real. And my kids know that. And I know they'll ask me straight out, and I'll ask them straight out. So I'm really fortunate to have that in my life. So I am unbelievably blessed. I wake up every morning, pinch myself, say, what did I do to have such great fortune?
Well, speaking of real, let's get to the real point of this entire podcast. Getting better every shift, getting better as an individual, getting better as a captain, getting better as a peer supporter, whatever it is. How about you? What are you doing to get better?
Me?
Yep.
Getting better? Yeah. Oh, I know. That I'm always learning. I'm always reading. I get up early in the morning and read 3 newspapers. I read the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the front page of the New York Times, and then a local paper, and then read the stories that I want to read. So I spend probably about an hour and a half a day reading. That is, for me, it keeps me informed. It keeps me, balanced. I don't spend a lot of time talking about politics. I don't watch the news, but I do read about it. Fitness is really important. Diet is really important. And just being with people that I genuinely care about and care about me. As you get older, you kind of weed the people out that you don't want in your life, that are negatives in your life. So um, I'm confident enough to do that these days. In the past, I wasn't. I really don't want to be with that person because they don't make me feel good. So I'm not going to be. But I have tremendous amount of people in my life because so many people, so many good people out there. So those are the things that I do. Like I said, really enjoy having conversations like this. This to me, I'll feel really good after having talked to both of you. Because I know it's been helpful to me. Maybe somebody out there it can be helpful to.
And that's the whole purpose. I can't thank you enough. I too get that same kind of feeling when we get done with these. And that's really what it's all about. Hopefully we can affect more than just one person, but if that's all it is, it does make for a better day for both, you and me, and for the commander. Frank, thanks so much for finally being on. I apologize for taking so long, but I knew you were going to be so good, and I wanted to make sure I could match, your expertise with, having enough podcast experience underneath my belt. So thanks for the words of wisdom. For our listeners, if you are just listening to this, you should come and watch us on video. You can watch us on the firerescue1.com webpage. You can email us at bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. Please rate, review the show, whether you're listening, watching. You can also go to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions or anything you want us to relay on to Captain Leto, we'd be happy to do that. I really just want to summarize, again, all the great words of wisdom. You really talked about building a protocol for resilience, obviously reaching out and building relationships, and also take care of yourself from a mental health standpoint, from a physical standpoint. It's all about what you eat, what you do, how you interact with people. And ultimately, it's about learning something, doing something, and sharing something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.